They kicked me out over a small mistake, but when Grandpa's will was read showed who really owned the empire. The rain lashed against the cracked window pane of my tiny studio apartment as I stared blankly at the eviction notice taped to my door. It had been exactly 6 months since my family disowned me over what they called an unforgivable betrayal. To them, it was a simple accounting error that cost our family business $50,000, pocket change in the grand scheme of our multi-million-dollar empire. To me, it was a mistake born from exhaustion and overwork, one that I'd spent countless nights trying to rectify. I could still hear my mother's voice echoing in my mind, sharp and cutting like shattered glass. After everything we've given you, this is how you repay us? You're dead to us, Charlotte. My father hadn't even looked up from his phone when security escorted me out of our mansion. My brother James, who had always been my closest confidant, merely shook his head in disappointment before turning away. The only person who hadn't condemned me was Grandpa Henry, but even he couldn't override their decision. Grandpa had built our family's manufacturing empire from nothing, starting with a small tool shop in the 1960s. He was the one who taught me everything about business, often saying, "Charlotte, numbers are just stories waiting to be told." I remembered spending weekends at his side, watching him turn complex financial reports into narratives that made sense to an 8-year-old girl. He saw something in me that others didn't, a spark for understanding not just figures, but people. That spark had led me to become the company's youngest CFO at 28, managing assets worth hundreds of millions. Yet when that single mistake happened, all those years of dedication meant nothing. They stripped me of my position, froze my accounts, and changed the security codes to every property bearing our name. Overnight, I went from being part of one of the city's most prominent families to sleeping on friends' couches until I could scrape together enough money for this modest apartment. Every day brought a fresh wave of humiliation. Former colleagues avoided eye contact when I ran into them at coffee shops. Social media became a minefield of carefully curated photos showcasing family gatherings where I was conspicuously absent. My name disappeared from company press releases and annual reports, replaced by James's increasingly prominent presence. Even the local papers carried stories about how the prodigal son was stepping up to fill the void left by his disgraced sister. But perhaps the hardest part was losing access to Grandpa Henry. His health had been declining for years, Parkinson's disease slowly stealing his mobility and speech. Our weekly chess games, once sacred traditions, were abruptly cancelled. Each time I tried to visit, the staff would inform me that Mr. Whitmore isn't receiving visitors today. Only later did I learn that James had ordered them to keep me away, claiming it was for Grandpa's own good. I threw myself into freelance consulting work, taking whatever projects came my way. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same skills they deemed too dangerous to trust were now helping other companies thrive. Nights were the worst. Insomnia kept me company as I replayed every moment leading up to my downfall. The late hours reviewing quarterly reports, the pressure to meet impossible deadlines, the exhaustion that caused me to overlook that critical decimal point. They said I'd betrayed the family, but the truth was far more complicated. Without warning, my phone buzzed violently against the worn wooden table. An unknown number flashed across the screen, its area code matching the family estate. My heart pounded as I answered, half expecting another lawyer demanding I sign more paperwork severing ties. Instead, a familiar voice crackled through the speaker. "Miss Charlotte? This is Margaret from the main house. There's been a development regarding Mr. Henry's will." Margaret had been with the family since before I was born, her loyalty unwavering even after my fall from grace. Her voice trembled slightly as she continued, "Your presence is requested at the reading tomorrow afternoon. Mr. Henry made specific arrangements before." She paused, collecting herself. "Before his passing last night." The room spun around me as the words sank in. Grandpa was gone. The man who had always believed in me, who had seen beyond my mistakes to the person I truly was, had left this world without me by his side. James had succeeded in keeping us apart until the very end. Tears blurred my vision as anger and grief warred within me. How dare they deny me the chance to say goodbye? Through her own tears, Margaret explained that Grandpa had anticipated resistance from the family about including me. "He took extraordinary measures to ensure your attendance," she whispered cryptically. "Please, Charlotte, come tomorrow. For him." The next morning dawned gray and heavy, mirroring the storm clouds gathering in my chest. Dressed in the only professional attire I could afford, I approached the mansion gates with trepidation. Security guards nodded respectfully instead of turning me away, their expressions unreadable. Inside, the familiar scent of aged wood and polished marble hit me like a physical force, memories flooding back with every step toward the conference room. James stood outside, his designer suit immaculate as always. His eyes narrowed at the sight of me. "You have some nerve showing up here," he hissed under his breath. "Do you think playing victim will change anything?" Before I could respond, Margaret appeared, her normally composed demeanor replaced by barely contained excitement. "Everyone's waiting inside," she announced, ushering me past James's protests. The room fell silent as I entered, my parents' faces masks of barely concealed fury. Attorneys lined one wall while various cousins and distant relatives filled the remaining seats. At the head of the table sat two men I didn't recognize, their presence radiating authority. The senior attorney cleared his throat, holding up a thick folder stamped with official seals. "We are gathered here today to read the last will and testament of Henry Whitmore," he began formally. "However, before we proceed, there are some unusual instructions we must follow." He produced an old-fashioned cassette player, placing it carefully on the table. "Mr. Whitmore recorded a message specifically addressing each member of this family. We are required to play it in full before any provisions of the will can be disclosed." A collective murmur rippled through the room as the tape clicked on, and suddenly, Grandpa's voice filled the space. Though weakened by illness, his tone remained strong and clear. "To my beloved family, if you're hearing this, it means I've finally joined your grandmother in the great accounting office in the sky. Before we get to the legal mumbo-jumbo, there's something important I need to share." The recording paused briefly, and when Grandpa spoke again, his voice carried a weight that silenced every whisper. "You see, during my final months, I conducted a little experiment. I watched how each of you responded to crisis, particularly when Charlotte made her mistake. Some of you rallied together, some pointed fingers, and some." Another pause, this one heavy with meaning. "Some showed their true colors." My mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat while James's jaw tightened visibly. The attorney monitoring the playback exchanged a glance with his colleague, their professional masks slipping slightly. Grandpa continued, "I've spent my life building this empire, teaching you all the value of numbers, strategy, and leadership. But the most crucial lesson has always been about character. About standing by your family, especially when they stumble." The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees as his words sank in. "Charlotte," Grandpa addressed me directly, though his voice remained steady for everyone to hear, "you've always understood that numbers tell stories. Stories about choices, about growth, about redemption. That's why I'm leaving the task of determining the future of our empire to you." Gasps erupted throughout the room, quickly silenced by the attorney's raised hand. "Before you protest," Grandpa's recorded voice continued, "listen carefully. I've established a series of challenges, tests designed to reveal who among you possess the qualities necessary to lead this family forward. These aren't about balance sheets or profit margins, though heaven knows those matter. No, these challenges are about integrity, resilience, and the ability to learn from mistakes rather than fear them." The senior attorney opened a separate document, scanning its contents. "It appears Mr. Whitmore has indeed created an elaborate system of evaluations. Each family member will participate, with Miss Charlotte serving as both participant and overseer. The results will determine not just inheritance shares, but control of various company divisions." James slammed his fist on the table. "This is preposterous. Father built this company." "Actually," the second attorney interrupted, consulting another file, "according to these documents, Henry Whitmore maintained sole ownership of the company until his death. Your father managed operations, yes, but never held controlling interest. Furthermore, these challenges hold legal weight due to their incorporation into the formal will structure." Chaos erupted as relatives shouted objections, demanded explanations, and questioned the legality of Grandpa's plan. Through the commotion, I noticed Margaret discreetly slipping me a folded piece of paper. Opening it under the table, I recognized Grandpa's distinctive handwriting. "Remember our chess games, Charlotte. Sometimes the best moves require patience and perspective. Trust yourself." As order gradually restored, the attorneys outlined the first challenge, a comprehensive review of recent company decisions, identifying both successes and failures. Each family member would present their findings, with Charlotte responsible for moderating discussions and evaluating responses. The catch? All presentations must include personal reflections on lessons learned from mistakes, their own or others. Watching my family struggle with this requirement would prove illuminating. James, usually so confident, stumbled through his analysis, clearly uncomfortable discussing errors. Mother's presentation focused heavily on blaming external factors rather than internal shortcomings. Meanwhile, cousins I barely knew revealed surprising insights about market trends and operational efficiencies. Throughout these sessions, fragments of Grandpa's teachings echoed in my mind. He'd always emphasized that failure wasn't the opposite of success, but rather its foundation. Every mistake, he used to say during our chess games, is just another move in the larger game of learning. Now, faced with my family's varying approaches to adversity, I understood the depth of his wisdom. The challenges grew more complex, requiring coordination between family members to solve supply chain issues or develop new product lines. In these collaborative tasks, patterns emerged that no financial report could capture. Some relatives excelled at creative problem-solving but struggled with accountability. Others demonstrated technical expertise while lacking empathy for team dynamics. Through it all, I documented observations, weighing each person's contributions against Grandpa's core values. Weeks turned into months, and the mansion transformed into a battleground of competing ambitions. Late-night strategy sessions replaced formal dinners, boardroom debates echoed through halls once filled with laughter. During these intense periods, memories of Grandpa surfaced unexpectedly, in the way sunlight caught the chessboard in his study, or how certain phrases triggered recollections of his patient explanations. One evening, exhausted from mediating yet another heated discussion, I found myself alone in Grandpa's library. Rows of business books shared space with volumes on philosophy and psychology, their spines worn from frequent use. Running my fingers along the shelves, I discovered a hidden compartment behind a false panel. Inside lay a journal, its pages filled with Grandpa's meticulous handwriting. The entries revealed more than just business strategies, they chronicled his own mistakes and lessons learned. There were accounts of failed ventures, misjudged partnerships, and near bankruptcies narrowly avoided. Most striking were his reflections on family dynamics, noting how different relatives responded to challenges over the years. Several passages specifically addressed my situation. Charlotte possesses the rare ability to see both forest and trees. Her so-called mistake was actually a gift, exposing weaknesses in our systems that others refuse to acknowledge. If she can guide this family through what I've planned, she'll prove herself worthy not just of leadership but of something more precious, forgiveness. Tears blurred the words as understanding dawned. Grandpa hadn't just been testing our business acumen, he'd been engineering opportunities for reconciliation and growth. Each challenge forced us to confront not just professional shortcomings but personal biases and fears. The real inheritance wasn't wealth or power, but the chance to redefine what it meant to be a Whitmore. Armed with this knowledge, I approached the remaining challenges with renewed purpose. Family members began opening up, sharing vulnerabilities they'd long hidden behind polished facades. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, alliances shifted. Old rivalries gave way to genuine collaboration as we worked through problems that required more than just technical expertise to solve. Yet despite these positive developments, tension simmered beneath the surface. James grew increasingly volatile, his frustration manifesting in passive-aggressive comments and thinly veiled threats. Mother retreated into icy silence, while father oscillated between pride in the family legacy and resentment at having his authority questioned. The final challenge loomed ahead, a comprehensive restructuring proposal that would determine not just asset distribution but the very direction of the Whitmore empire. As I prepared for this crucial phase, memories of Grandpa's guidance provided both comfort and clarity. The chessboard in his study remained set up exactly as we'd left it during our last game, pieces frozen in positions that suggested multiple winning strategies. Just like in those matches, the path forward required considering not just immediate gains but long-term consequences, balancing ambition with compassion, and recognizing that sometimes the bravest move was choosing peace over victory. The day of the final presentation arrived, bringing with it an electric charge that made the mansion's ancient walls seem to hum with anticipation. Family members gathered in the grand ballroom, transformed into a makeshift boardroom with projectors and screens lining the ornate walls. Each person carried folders thick with proposals, their body language broadcasting varying degrees of confidence and anxiety. James positioned himself at the center of the room, flanked by supporters who had gravitated toward his aggressive approach to restructuring. Their plan emphasized rapid expansion, leveraging debt to acquire competitors and consolidate market share. Mother and father presented a more conservative strategy, focusing on maintaining current operations while gradually modernizing outdated processes. Various cousins offered niche proposals targeting specific market segments or technological innovations. When it was my turn to present, I felt Grandpa's presence more strongly than ever. The chessboard's unfinished game seemed imprinted on my mind as I approached the podium. Instead of launching directly into financial projections, I began with a story, one Grandpa had told me during countless strategy sessions. In 1973, I started, projecting my voice to reach every corner of the room. Our company faced bankruptcy. A major client defaulted on payments, suppliers demanded immediate settlement, and banks refused further credit. Grandpa Henry gathered what resources remained and did something unexpected. He invested in training programs for our workforce while simultaneously renegotiating supplier contracts. Many called it reckless, but he understood that true strength lies not in quick fixes, but in sustainable foundations. The room fell silent as I detailed how this approach had eventually saved the company, setting the stage for decades of growth. Our current challenges aren't fundamentally different, I continued, advancing to the first slide. Yes, we need to modernize and expand, but not at the cost of abandoning our core values. What I propose is a hybrid model that incorporates elements from everyone's suggestions while addressing weaknesses exposed during these past months. The presentation unfolded methodically, weaving together data-driven analysis with human-centered considerations. I highlighted instances where family members had demonstrated exceptional problem-solving during the challenges, suggesting ways to leverage these strengths in leadership roles. Rather than positioning departments in competition, I proposed collaborative structures that encouraged cross-functional innovation. Midway through, I paused at a slide displaying a familiar image, the chessboard from Grandpa's study. Each piece represents different aspects of our business and family, I explained. The pawns are our frontline workers, often underestimated but capable of remarkable advancement. Knights represent our ability to make unexpected moves, challenging conventional thinking. Rooks symbolize stability and structural integrity, while bishops remind us to consider multiple perspectives. James interrupted, his voice tense. This is all very poetic, Charlotte, but we need concrete action plans, not metaphors. His supporters nodded in agreement, sensing an opportunity to undermine my proposal. I smiled, recalling Grandpa's favorite chess tactic, the subtle maneuver that appeared defensive but actually set up a powerful offensive. Concrete actions begin with clear values, I responded, advancing to the next slides. These displayed detailed implementation timelines, budget allocations, and risk management strategies. What I'm proposing combines James's aggressive growth targets with mother and father's emphasis on stability, supported by innovative solutions from our cousins' specialized proposals. The room buzzed with murmurs as attendees cross-referenced my comprehensive plan against their own ideas. Some family members began nodding in appreciation, recognizing elements of their work integrated into the broader strategy. Others shifted uncomfortably, realizing their proposals had been improved upon through collaboration rather than competition. As I concluded, I returned to the chessboard analogy. In chess, the queen is the most powerful piece, able to move in any direction. But victory requires more than just power. It demands strategy, sacrifice, and sometimes allowing others to take the lead. Grandpa understood this better than anyone. He didn't build this empire through domination, but through calculated cooperation. The senior attorney rose, signaling the formal portion of the proceedings was complete. Family members broke into animated discussions, debating merits of various proposals. James cornered me near the refreshment table, his expression conflicted. "You've certainly done your homework," he admitted grudgingly. "But do you really think this touchy-feely approach will work in the real world?" Before I could respond, Margaret approached with an envelope bearing Grandpa's distinctive handwriting. "He left this for you," she whispered, her eyes glistening. "To be opened only after all presentations were complete." The room quieted as I carefully broke the seal. Inside lay a single sheet of paper, its message brief but profound. "My dear Charlotte, if you're reading this, it means you've successfully guided our family through the trials I set. Remember, leadership isn't about controlling pieces on a board, but about empowering others to find their own paths forward. Trust your instincts, honor our values, and never forget that true strength lies in forgiveness, both of others and yourself. With all my love, Grandpa. Tears blurred my vision as I realized the final challenge wasn't about choosing a single winner, but about finding a way to unite our fractured family around shared purpose. The chessboard's unfinished game suddenly made perfect sense. Grandpa had deliberately left multiple viable paths forward, each requiring different combinations of skill, courage, and compassion to complete. Looking around the room, I saw not just rivals for control but potential partners in rebuilding something greater than any individual ambition. James caught my gaze, his expression softening slightly. Mother dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief while father studied the chessboard projection with renewed interest. Even distant cousins who had previously seemed indifferent now engaged in earnest discussions about implementation details. The senior attorney cleared his throat, drawing attention back to the formal proceedings. Based on Mr. Whitmore's instructions and the comprehensive evaluations conducted, we are prepared to announce preliminary decisions regarding leadership positions and asset distribution. He paused, consulting his notes. However, there remains one final element to address, a personal letter from Mr. Whitmore to each family member, containing specific guidance and expectations moving forward. As envelopes were distributed, I noticed something remarkable happening. Walls of resentment began crumbling, replaced by tentative gestures of reconciliation. James approached me hesitantly, offering not apologies but questions about implementing certain aspects of the proposal. Mother expressed interest in mentoring younger family members, while father suggested forming a council to oversee strategic decisions collectively. The air vibrated with possibility as each person processed Grandpa's individual messages alongside the collective challenge he'd orchestrated. Some reacted with relief, others with determination, but all seemed united by a newfound appreciation for the complexity of leadership he'd sought to teach us. Standing amidst this transformation, I understood that Grandpa's greatest legacy wasn't the empire itself but the opportunity he'd created for us to rediscover what truly mattered. The chess pieces on the board seemed to shimmer in the afternoon light, their positions suggesting not just multiple winning strategies but infinite possibilities for growth and renewal. The months that followed were a whirlwind of transformation. The family, once fractured and suspicious, began to find their rhythm within the new structure Grandpa had envisioned. Leadership roles were distributed not based on seniority or bloodline, but on demonstrated ability and character revealed through the challenges. James, surprisingly, found his niche in fostering innovation and spearheading research initiatives, areas where his ambition could be channeled constructively. Mother took charge of community engagement and philanthropy, rediscovering her passion for giving back, a value she'd long suppressed under the weight of maintaining appearances. Father embraced an advisory role, mentoring younger family members while stepping back from day-to-day operations. As for me, I was named CEO, not out of favoritism, as some initially suspected, but because the collective evaluations showed I had earned it through resilience, empathy, and strategic vision. It wasn't a position of power so much as one of stewardship, ensuring that every decision aligned with Grandpa's core principles: integrity, collaboration, and growth through learning. But perhaps the most profound change came when we implemented what Grandpa called the forgiveness protocol. Embedded within the restructuring plan was a mandate for monthly meetings where family members openly discussed mistakes, both professional and personal, and worked together to address them. At first, these sessions felt awkward, even confrontational. Old wounds resurfaced, and tempers flared. Yet over time, something remarkable happened: vulnerability became strength. We learned to see each other not as rivals or disappointments, but as human beings striving to do better. One evening, during one such meeting, James stood up and addressed the room. His voice trembled slightly, but his words carried unmistakable sincerity. "I owe Charlotte an apology," he said, looking directly at me. "What I did, how I treated you after the accounting error, it was wrong. Worse than wrong, it was cruel. I let pride and fear blind me to the truth about who you are and what you've always stood for." The room fell silent, all eyes shifting between us. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Then I remembered Grandpa's letter: "True strength lies in forgiveness, both of others and yourself." Slowly, I rose from my seat and walked over to him. Extending my hand, I said simply, "Thank you for saying that. And for listening." When our hands met, a ripple of emotion passed through the room. Some wiped away tears, others exchanged glances filled with quiet understanding. In that moment, decades of resentment seemed to dissolve, leaving behind something fragile yet beautiful, a chance to rebuild trust. A year later, the Whitmore empire was thriving in ways no one could have predicted. Revenue soared not just because of smart investments and innovative strategies, but because employees and stakeholders alike felt connected to a mission larger than profit margins. Our workforce retention rates skyrocketed, partnerships flourished, and customer loyalty reached unprecedented levels. The media dubbed it the Whitmore Renaissance, though none of us thought of it that way. To us, it was simply proof that Grandpa had been right all along. Success begins with people, not numbers. On the anniversary of Grandpa's passing, we gathered in his study, the same room where so many pivotal moments had unfolded. The chessboard still sat there, untouched since the day he left us. Margaret brought out a bottle of aged whiskey Grandpa had set aside specifically for this occasion, along with a final envelope bearing his familiar handwriting. Inside was a single sentence. "Success is meaningless unless shared with those you love." We toasted to him then, laughter mingling with tears as stories flowed freely. Someone mentioned how Grandpa used to say, "Every move matters," and another chimed in with, "Even the ones that seem like mistakes." By the end of the night, the chessboard had become a centerpiece once more, its pieces rearranged into countless possibilities. Later, as I stood alone in the dim light of the study, I noticed something tucked beneath the chessboard, a small wooden box engraved with my initials. Opening it, I found a key and a note. "Charlotte, if you're reading this, it means you've proven yourself worthy of the greatest responsibility, carrying forward not just the business but the values that make it worth preserving. This key unlocks the private archives below the estate. There you'll find letters addressed to future generations, documenting lessons learned and dreams yet unfulfilled. Guard them well, and add your own story when the time comes." Tears blurred my vision as I realized the full scope of Grandpa's legacy. He hadn't merely secured the company's future, he created a living, breathing testament to the power of redemption, growth, and love. The archives were more than records. They were a promise that our family's story would continue, shaped by those willing to learn from the past while daring to dream of the future. Years passed, and the Whitmore name became synonymous not just with success but with compassion. When my children asked about their great-grandfather, I told them stories of a man who saw beyond titles and wealth to the heart of what truly mattered. And whenever they struggled with failure or doubt, I reminded them of his favorite saying, "Numbers tell stories, but only people give those stories meaning." In the end, the empire wasn't defined by factories or balance sheets, but by the countless lives touched by Grandpa's wisdom. Through trials and triumphs, losses and victories, we remained united, not by blood alone but by the shared belief that mistakes aren't endings but opportunities to begin again. And so the Whitmore legacy endured, not as a monument to perfection but as a celebration of humanity, resilience, and the enduring power of forgiveness.